simple but very important idea: why some businesses scale and others stall, despite having good strategy and very capable people. I propose to talk for a little over 30 minutes and share some insights from my work with senior teams, a practical way to diagnose where you are today, and most importantly, what to do about it. To manage flow, we'll have three Q&A sessions when I shall pause roughly every 10 minutes or so and pick up on whatever has come through on the chat. This event is being streamed across multiple platforms, and the functionality is inevitably very different. There's invariably a lag between what people put in the chat and what comes through to me. I think it's as much as 10, 15 seconds. So please bear with it. Use the chat channels provided, and they should all come together and arrive with me as one single feed. So fingers crossed, the tech works, and let's get rolling. So let me start with a very, very simple observation. Most senior leadership teams don't scale businesses, they run them. And these are not the same thing at all. Running a business is invariably about effort. Many people I speak with liken it to a game of splat the rat, keeping things moving, solving immediate problems, making tactical decisions. But scaling a business is different. Scaling requires a system and not just effort. And that system is built by the senior leadership team. Before we get into some of the detail of that, what I'd like to do is just share with you, if I can. A few very brief words about me for those who don't know me, and explain why I've become so obsessed about senior leadership teams. So very quickly, I started my career working as an analyst in the chairman's office of one of the country's biggest family firms at the time, and I spent my days living inside spreadsheets, analyzing mergers and acquisitions. I very much enjoyed the work, but what really caught my attention was what the numbers didn't explain. And ultimately, what really informed go or no-go decisions on taking things forward. Put simply, on paper, many businesses looked remarkably similar, yet the reality was that their valuations were wildly different. And I really wanted to understand why. And that question, dare I say it, kind of shaped the career and life that I've had since. I moved into roles focused on how organizations actually work day to day and how senior teams operate, how decisions got made, and why some businesses consistently deliver whilst others stall, despite having good strategies and very capable people. A real light bulb moment came for me during the work I did on turnarounds. And there was one in particular, which was a biotech business in crisis. What changed performance was not strategy alone, it was redesigning the senior leadership team, the focus of its work, how it worked together, and how it faced into the business. And as the leadership system changed and the SLT became smaller and more compact, the business scaled from 3.5 million turnover to over 35 million in under 3 years. And that experience fundamentally shaped the work that I do today and informs the approach that I wrote about in my book, which is Lighting the Blue Touch Paper, which enjoyed a highly successful launch before Christmas 2025 and became a #1 bestseller. It's reviewing extremely well on Amazon with multiple five-star reviews that consistently point to how grounded and practical the content is. So today I work with business leaders to design and coach senior teams which investors trust and that businesses can scale behind to maximize enterprise value at exit. It's my experience that leadership is not about individual heroes. It's about building a leadership system. Managers work inside the system that's applied. Leaders work on the system that's designed. And when that system's designed well, everything, performance, everything lifts. So this afternoon, I'd like to share four things with you. The first is to highlight a blind spot, which is shared by many senior leaders, lay bare a myth, and some lazy language and thinking is what I'm really looking to expose there, and share a powerful tool I use with senior teams that starts an honest conversation and outline a practical approach to designing senior leadership teams that can scale a business. So, why do senior leadership teams matter? Well, for me, they are the most important and most powerful performance lever in any organization. And its purpose of a senior team is to design and build the leadership system the firm operates, and managers work within to deliver the results. Ultimately, it's the leadership team that decides what the business does, where attention goes, how decisions get made, and who is accountable. And if the leadership team is aligned, decisive, and collectively accountable for enterprise outcomes, the business moves quickly. And if the leadership team is cautious, fragmented, or political, then the whole organization is cautious, fragmented, and political, and slows right down. Most senior leadership teams that I meet describe themselves as high performing, which always fascinates me because if that were true, then business problems that we repeatedly encounter would be solved by now. This erroneous belief of believing that you perform better than you actually do has a name. And I'd like to share a short, amusing story of how it came about. And to do that, let's just go back in time and meet this gentleman, John Cannell, who completed a comprehensive research study in the US education sector way back in 1987 to investigate how all 50 states were claiming educational outcomes that were all above the national average. An impossibility. So, among many things, he asked students to rate their ability to get along with others. And over 70% rated themselves in the top 10%. 94% of university professors say they're doing a better job than the national average, their average colleague. So our illusions of superiority, which is what Cannell exposed, on what we do and how well we perform, are so widespread that psychologists call it the Lake Wobegon effect, which is a name taken from Garrison Keillor's famous radio show, the same name, which featured the fictional town of Lake Wobegon. And what made Lake Wobegon so special is because this is a place where all women are strong, all men are good looking, and all children are above average. The harsh truth is that, sorry, most leadership teams believe that they're performing at a higher level than they actually are because of how they're looking at themselves. Inside the leadership team, people benchmark against effort and intent. We're working hard, we're really committed, we're doing our best. But outside the leadership team, investors and employees benchmark something quite different. They're looking at speed of decision making and consistency of execution, as well as alignment across the enterprise. Those are very, very different lenses. One focused on effort and intention, and the other one very much based on profiling results, which is why 92% of employees think that their senior leadership team is ineffective. And given half the senior leadership teams surveyed by the likes of Gartner, but also Deloitte's and others, half of them don't know what they're doing or why they even exist. So given half of them don't know why they're there, the idea that 92% of staff think that their SLT is ineffective is hardly a surprise. But what it exposes about the SLT, because I'm sure the SLT won't describe themselves like that, it's a blind spot. And many leadership teams collectively experience this Lake Wobegon effect, namely a tendency for the leadership team to believe high performing, they're performing above the average. So when I start my work with senior leadership teams, I tend to discover some very similar patterns. First up is most businesses don't fail because of bad strategy. They're much more likely to fail because of what happens in that gap between strategy and the results which are intended. So often, decisions get revisited, silos work to protect their own agenda and prioritize it over the overall business. And ownership just isn't real ownership. Individually, what it gives rise to doesn't look especially dramatic. It never really does. It's just accepted as the way it is. And this is the thing, leadership failings rarely present as a crisis. It just shows up as friction, drag, and drift. And collectively, that drift, which is largely invisible and which doesn't get captured in a single cost center, can add up to 3 to 5% of margin. And if you're targeting 10%, that's a big slice. And here's the thing, it's not so much a performance issue as a leadership system issue. As the friction gradually builds up inside the organization, the business ends up working harder to compensate and doesn't move any faster. And as I said a moment ago, most teams I meet like to describe themselves as high performing, when in fact they're caught up in the here and now playing Splat the Rat. However, the fundamental question here isn't whether your team is high performing. Quite simply, that's a red herring, because not all high performing teams are built to scale. So how a SLT is designed and set up is what really matters. And that's what ultimately determines whether high performance translates into results. So whilst I do my first scan looking for questions, I'll put up this QR code that connects to a short quiz, which you are welcome to scan and complete the quiz. It'll only take 3-4 minutes, and it will give you a flavor of how your SLT performs. and help you pinpoint some friction points in your senior team, which may not be so obvious to you. So it's really designed to surface some of those blind spots I've been talking about. And if you complete this quiz, you put in your email address, I'll happily send you a PDF of my best-selling book as an extra bonus. So a PDF of this fella, which runs to some 300 pages actually, will land in your inbox by return. And just as I eyeball the chat, there's nothing that's come in yet, which is not unusual. So let's just press on. And what I'd like to do now is particularly share a tool that I use in my work to identify what level an SLT is performing at and its relative maturity when it comes to scaling a business. And at the left end of the spectrum, the leadership group exists primarily to support the founder or CEO. In the case of the support team, the founder operates as the single spider on the web. Information travels up and direction and decisions come down. Blame, of course, goes in all sorts of different directions, but never back to the founder or CEO. Then next along, from the far left, is the advisory team, which operates as a sounding board for the founder, where lots of discussion takes place and ideas are tested. However, authority and decision-making still sit with one person. So essentially what you've got here is an echo chamber, or more politely, a talking shop. It feels collaborative, but nothing much is going on. This is where chasing the red herring of high performance has real consequences, because these two teams may very well be high performing in the way that they operate, but they will most certainly not ever scale a business. The design here betrays a lifestyle business, not a performance business which is designed to scale. And then there is the functional team, where most organizations get stuck. And indeed, in professional services firms, these would be effectively practice groups, would be the term that they would use instead of a functional team. In a functional team, what you've got is strong individual specialists who fight their corner in sales, operations, or finance. In a professional services practice group-based organization, say a law firm, you might have people who represent a practice in corporate law, IP, intellectual property protection, employment law, litigation, whatever it may be. And each of these groups may very well perform well, but in terms of alignment, cooperation, and cross-functional, cross-party, cross-business working, doesn't. And it just stalls, particularly when the business comes under pressure. The collaborative team, which is the next one along, can actually run the business without the founder. Decisions are invariably collective. Leaders are actually thinking beyond their function, and leaders may very well be holding each other to account. But by far and away, the biggest shift takes place at the enterprise team level, because the critical thing here is how authority is distributed across and below the senior leadership team. And this is what really sets this particular team apart. is the system that it builds. Decision rights are clear. People know who decides what and where, at what level in the organization. Priorities are aligned. There's one integrated agenda, not multiple competing ones, as there might be with practice groups or functions. Execution is disciplined, and the rhythm, metrics, and follow through are consistent. And accountability is visible, yeah, in terms of how commitments are made, how they're tracked, and how they're honored. So the leadership system under an enterprise team is very clear. It scales confidently without dependency on a founder CEO or heroic effort or things holding together. It doesn't depend on that. And just to reiterate an important point, um, collaborative teams don't always scale the business. Sometimes collaboration is where most leadership conversations stop in the pursuit of alignment. And that's very necessary, but it's not sufficient. Alignment improves performance at an enterprise level, but systems make performance scalable. So for the backup detail behind this tool, I shared this matrix with you, which I know is making your eyes bleed. So just take a screenshot or simply a photograph and add it to your records and use it to profile your own and senior team. Um, but critically, I think what I'd really like to say is what's behind this tool and how it works out in reality is that in the longer term, these different configurations have consequences, especially if you're scaling to sell, if that's very much front of mind. Because when buyers see a fragile leadership team dominated by a single individual, risk increases. And that risk creates discounts to whatever value a multiple of earnings provides. And on this chart, that line is, that horizontal line is the multiple of earnings. And the figures above and below are positive and negative variances on what would be a desktop valuation, whether it be 4 or 5 or 6 times EBITDA. By contrast, when buyers experience an aligned enterprise leadership team, that confidence increases even more. And that confidence is very likely going to command a premium to whatever multiple may apply in your industry sector. So the critical point here is that fragile leadership teams pivoting on a single individual often attract discounts approaching 30%, whereas cohesive enterprise leadership teams command premiums of 20% or more. The difference isn't intelligence. The difference is how leadership is designed, operates, and executes. So what do exceptional leadership teams do differently? The single most important thing they do is they stop making the mistake of treating leadership as a collection of personalities, and they start engaging with the idea of operating leadership as a system, and a leadership system that clarifies things which are often left ambiguous. So whilst I scan again for any questions or comments coming in, I'll put up this QR code that connects to the short quiz that will help you understand where on that spectrum your senior team might sit. So please scan, and it's perfectly free, takes 3-4 minutes to complete. And I'll send you a PDF of my best-selling book as a bonus. And you can join my newsletter for updates, free content, and occasional bonus material. And I've got a question here from Lady Cheryl, who's asking, all very interesting. Haven't seen senior teams described like that before. What do you propose to do in terms of improving and moving to the right? I'm paraphrasing, but that is the essence of that question. So that's a beautiful setup for my next slide, which quite simply is, without design, performance isn't going to scale. So, and to Cheryl, this is a foundational tool I developed, which I call the Leadership Operating System Canvas, which forces the senior team to answer a set of deceptively simple questions so as to create system levers for guiding and driving the business. So setting out some rules around how decisions are made, and in particular, what decisions belong at this table, the top table. And sorting this out alone will just add huge speed throughout the business in terms of where people know where to go to get things sorted. What behaviors define how we lead together? And this is well worth addressing, making it explicit so that it promotes consistency, not just within the team, but throughout the business. How do we manage conflict? How do we resolve disagreement? Again, norms that shape behaviors that can scale. And what does enterprise accountability mean? And how do we recognize it and make it visible? The value of the conversations around this canvas isn't so much about what they add, rather it's about what they remove, which is a lot of ambiguity in politics and the unpicking of agreed decisions and creeping misalignment. The next step is measuring how leadership is practiced. And developing your own performance dashboard allows teams to see whether we're doing the right things and whether we're doing them well. It turns instinct into evidence, and this matters, not least because leadership teams are often opinion rich and evidence poor. The dashboard helps to force prioritization in terms of setting an agenda, and it surfaces what really matters and what does not. A weak senior team only comes together in meetings, is very activity focused, and spends its life in reporting mode. By contrast, a strong senior team is system focused, works on shaping the future and delivering enterprise outcomes. And a SLT's dashboard takes some effort to design because it deliberately brings three different types of data together. The first is how the team feels it's operating. So the qualitative human reality of leadership and what it feels like to be together in the room, if I can put it that way. The second is the leading indicators that show whether the right things, the priorities, are happening day to day. And third, the lagging results that confirm whether those activities are actually paying off. Critically, when senior teams don't build systems, execution risk increases, growth slows down, and value gets discounted. And when they do make the shift from opinion to operating with data focused on the senior team's performance, that performance becomes much more predictable, growth accelerates, and value compounds. Most senior teams don't struggle because everything's broken. They struggle because one or two of these elements are thin, and the rest of the system is quietly working around the gap. And when norms are fuzzy, politics creeps in. When roles aren't clear, decisions slow down or float upwards. And when there's no execution rhythm, strategy only looks good on slides but goes nowhere in practice. So a performance dashboard helps by providing evidence that spotlights gaps and what needs to be worked on. High performing SLTs, such as the enterprise team, lead well beyond function. They align around shared purpose, give others a space and confidence to act, hold themselves accountable as a group, rather than individuals protecting their respective patches. Intentional leadership is their calling card, and they practice it religiously to develop leaders within their own reporting lines so that the whole business operates as though it's running on the front foot. A well designed dashboard makes this all very visible, and it shows how leadership is really landing in terms of execution speed, trust, clarity, and accountability. And once leadership can be seen, it can be improved. It stops being personal and it starts being professional. And this is where it all comes together. SLTs reduce execution risk by making leadership visible at multiple points in the business, increase predictability, and build investor confidence and attract a premium at sale. So what I'd like to do, as we've passed the half-hour mark, is just finish with an observation. Every organization eventually becomes a reflection of the conversations happening at the top of it. If those conversations are cautious, fragmented, or political, the organization becomes cautious, fragmented, and political. And if those conversations are clear, challenging, and enterprise focused, the organization moves faster, becomes braver, and is much more aligned. And that's why senior leadership teams and their performance matters so much. Not because the senior team sits at the top of the structure, but because it sets the tone, the ambition, speed, and trajectory for the entire business. So when people look at your leadership team, what do you think they honestly see? The leadership system sets the conditions, but it's the behavior that determines the outcome. And in leadership teams, that behavior typically shows up in one of three ways. First is passengers, intelligent people showing up and attending meetings, but having zero influence on outcomes, very often by design, just in support or advisory senior team configurations. Pretenders, who are articulate contributors, who generate lots of activity and are very adept at avoiding any trace of accountability. And you will observe those characters most particularly within functional or practice group based setups in terms of your senior leadership team design. The design for performers allows leaders to think beyond their function. Indeed, it encourages it to make decisions and own enterprise outcomes. So when you're building your senior leadership team, what are you building it to be? To help you answer that question, I'd ask you to reflect on your leadership team's purpose and role, and whether it's a team that runs the business or one that builds a system that scales the business. So, uh, by all means, please connect with me on LinkedIn if you've not done so already. I'm regularly posting here on LinkedIn and currently generate very high engagement levels because I'm only posting my own original material. And if you're leading a senior team, please scan this QR code to complete the short diagnostic. It's designed to help you understand a little bit more about the real character of your leadership team that's building or destroying the value of your business. And as I've said before, I'm more than happy to send to you a free PDF of my book. And let me just check for any last questions or comments, of which there's not any that I can see. So thank you, Cheryl, for your question earlier, and thank you all very much for listening. I trust that this event, this webinar, was of value to you. Thank you very much.